My brother-in-law confessed his love to my wife. We found years of stalker photos on his computer, and now two families are in crisis. I'm just a regular guy in my early 30s, living in a small town in the Midwest. I've been married to my wife, Emily, not her real name, for 6 years, and she's the best thing that's ever happened to me. She's smart, kind, funny, and gorgeous, like so gorgeous that people sometimes do double takes when we're out together, and I just kind of stand there like, yep, that's my wife. I know I hit the jackpot with her, and I try to never take it for granted. We live a pretty quiet life. No kids yet, but we've got a dog who's basically our baby, and we're super close to my family. My older sister, Rachel, and I have always been tight. She's one of those people who can light up a room just by walking into it, and I've always admired her. She's been married to Matt for almost 10 years. Matt and I have always been cool. He's the kind of guy who's good at making small talk and cracking jokes, and I honestly thought we were friends. We've hung out a ton over the years, everything from family barbecues to double dates with him and Rachel. He's the kind of guy you'd trust to house sit or grab a beer with. Or at least, I thought he was that kind of guy. Turns out I didn't know him at all. So, this all kicked off last Tuesday. It was a normal morning, nothing out of the ordinary. I was getting ready for work when Emily mentioned that Matt had texted her, asking if she wanted to grab lunch. I didn't think much of it at first. Like I said, we're all close, and Matt's always been friendly with Emily. I just assumed he wanted to chat about something random, or maybe surprise Rachel with a gift or plan a family thing. Emily seemed a little hesitant, though. She even asked me, "Do you think it's weird he wants to have lunch, just the two of us?" Looking back now, maybe that should have been my first red flag, but at the time I brushed it off. I was like, nah, it's Matt. He probably just wants to catch up. Famous last words, right? Emily shrugged and said okay, but I could tell she wasn't totally comfortable with the idea. I kissed her goodbye, told her to have fun, and headed to work like it was any other day. Later that afternoon, I got home before Emily did, which was unusual because she's usually the first one back. When she finally walked through the door, I could tell immediately that something was wrong. She looked pale, like really pale, and her eyes were red like she'd been crying. I asked her what was going on, and she just stood there for a second, clutching her bag like it was the only thing keeping her upright. She finally said, "You're not going to believe this. I don't even know how to tell you." My stomach dropped. I don't know why, but in that moment, I just knew whatever she was about to say was going to change everything. I walked over to her, put my hands on her shoulders, and said, "Just tell me. Whatever it is, we'll figure it out." And then she said it. "Matt told me he's in love with me." I swear, time stopped for a second. I just stared at her, trying to process the words. "Wait, what?" I finally managed to say. She nodded, and then the whole story came pouring out. Apparently, when they met for lunch, everything seemed normal at first. They ordered food, made some small talk about work and family, and then Matt just dropped the bomb. He told her he's been in love with her since the first time they met, like years ago. He said he's been struggling with these feelings for so long, and he couldn't keep it to himself anymore. Oh, and he also told her he could give her a better life than I ever could. Like, excuse me, what? The audacity of this man. Emily said she was so shocked, she barely knew how to respond. She told him he was way out of line, grabbed her stuff, and left without finishing her food. She drove straight home and told me everything, which, by the way, I am so grateful for. The fact that she didn't even hesitate to tell me made me feel like we were still solid, even as my whole world felt like it was falling apart. At first, I didn't even know how to react. I was furious, obviously. I mean, this is supposed to be my brother-in-law, my family, the guy who's been at every Thanksgiving dinner, who helped us move into our house, who played with our dog while we were on vacation. And now, out of nowhere, he's trying to steal my wife? It felt like a betrayal on so many levels. I didn't even know where to start. But more than anything, I just felt blindsided. Like, how long has this been going on in his head? How many times have we all been hanging out? And he's been sitting there secretly lusting after Emily. It made my skin crawl just thinking about it. Emily was still super shaken up, so I did my best to calm her down. I told her she did the right thing by leaving, and that I was proud of her for standing up to him. But inside, I was already thinking about the next steps. I mean, I couldn't just let this slide, right? This wasn't the kind of thing you could just sweep under the rug and pretend didn't happen. Something had to be done. So, after Emily told me what happened, my mind was racing. I mean, what do you even do in a situation like this? Do I call Matt and confront him? Do I tell Rachel? Do I just show up at their house and punch him in the face? Okay, I wasn't actually going to do that, but the thought definitely crossed my mind. For a few minutes, I just sat there trying to figure out what the next step should be. Meanwhile, Emily was still visibly shaken, pacing around the living room and checking her phone like she expected Matt to pop out of the bushes or something. And then, as if on cue, her phone buzzed. It was a text from Matt. I know I shouldn't have read it. It was technically Emily's phone, but she showed it to me immediately because, well, transparency. The text said something like, "I'm so sorry. I shouldn't have said anything. Please don't tell Rachel." I wasn't thinking clearly. Oh, and here's the kicker. I hope we can keep this between us. Between us. As if Emily and I weren't a team. As if she'd just keep his little confession to herself, and everything would go back to normal. Emily didn't respond, and I told her not to. I figured anything she said could be twisted or used against her somehow. At this point, I knew we had to loop Rachel in. She deserved to know what kind of person she was married to. But I'll admit, I wasn't exactly looking forward to that conversation. Rachel's my sister, and I love her to death, but she's always been a little fiery. Like, she doesn't just get mad, she goes full scorched earth. And I knew this was going to blow her world apart. That night, while I was still trying to figure out how to approach Rachel, Matt decided to double down on his stupidity. Around 11 p.m., my phone started ringing. It was Matt. I let it go to voicemail because, honestly, I didn't trust myself to stay calm if I talked to him. A few minutes later, I got a text from him. "Please call me. We need to talk." "Yeah, no thanks, dude. Not interested." But then, and this is where things started to spiral. He must have realized I wasn't going to respond, so he went straight to Rachel instead. I didn't find out until the next morning, but apparently, he woke her up in the middle of the night to confess what had happened. Except, of course, he didn't tell her the truth. Oh no. Instead, he told her that Emily had flirted with him, that she'd led him on during lunch, and that he'd had to shut her down because he's such a loyal husband. Can you even believe that? The audacity of this guy. Rachel called me first thing the next morning, and she was furious. At me. She said something like, "What the hell is going on with Emily? Matt told me everything, and I'm not okay with this." It took me a second to even process what she was saying, but once I did, I was livid. I told her Matt was lying and that Emily had already come clean to me about what really happened. Rachel didn't believe me at first. She kept saying things like, "Why would Matt make something like this up?" And Emily must have misunderstood. It felt like I was banging my head against a wall. Eventually, I convinced her to come over so we could talk in person. I told her to bring Matt, which, looking back, was probably a mistake, but I wanted to confront him directly. I needed him to say this crap to my face. So, later that day, Rachel and Matt showed up at our house. Emily and I were sitting on the couch when they walked in, and the tension in the room was palpable. Rachel looked pissed. Matt, on the other hand, looked smug, like he thought he'd already won. I wanted to wipe that look off his face so badly, but I kept my cool. Barely. The confrontation started off civil enough. Rachel asked Emily to explain her side of the story, and Emily told her everything. How Matt had asked her to lunch, how he'd confessed his feelings, and how she'd shut him down and left immediately. She even showed Rachel the text Matt had sent afterward, the one where he begged her not to tell anyone. At that point, I thought, okay, this is it. Rachel's going to see the truth. But no, Matt doubled down. He said the text was taken out of context, and that he'd only sent it because he felt bad for rejecting Emily. He kept going on about how Emily had misinterpreted his kindness and that she'd been acting overly friendly for months. It was disgusting. I could see Emily trembling next to me, and I just wanted to throw him out of my house. That's when I snapped. I stood up and said, "Enough. You're lying, and you know it. You've been caught, and now you're trying to cover your ass." Matt tried to talk over me, but I wasn't having it. I turned to Rachel and said, "I love you, but you're being played. He's manipulating you because he knows he screwed up." Rachel looked torn. I could see the wheels turning in her head, but she wasn't ready to admit the truth yet. She said she needed time to think, and they left soon after. Emily started crying the moment the door closed, and I felt like an absolute failure. I'd wanted to protect her, but Matt had managed to twist things so much that now my own sister was doubting us. After the confrontation at our house, things were tense. Rachel wasn't talking to me or Emily, and Matt was still out there trying to play the victim. I was frustrated. No, scratch that, I was enraged. But Emily was the one I was most worried about. She was walking around on edge, constantly checking her phone like Matt was going to pull something else. She didn't want to go anywhere near Rachel's house, and honestly, I didn't blame her. I hated that Matt still had this kind of power over her, even after she'd done everything right. For a couple of days, everything was quiet. Too quiet. Rachel wasn't responding to my calls or texts, and I could tell she was stewing. I figured she was still processing everything, and I gave her some space, but I knew we couldn't leave things like this forever. Meanwhile, Emily just wanted to move on with her life. She kept saying, "I just want this to be over," and I didn't know what to tell her because, deep down, I had a sinking feeling it wasn't over. Not by a long shot. And then, the bombshell dropped. It was Friday night, and Emily and I were just sitting on the couch trying to distract ourselves with Netflix when my phone buzzed. It was Rachel. I picked up immediately, and before I could even say hello, she said, "I need to talk to you. Now." Her voice was sharp, and I could hear the anger in it. I told her to come over, but she said, "No, you come here." I glanced at Emily, who looked nervous, but I reassured her that I'd handle it. I kissed her on the forehead, told her to stay home, and drove over to Rachel's house. When I got there, Rachel was standing in the doorway, arms crossed, looking like she was ready to kill someone. And, judging by the look on her face, I was pretty sure that someone was mad. She didn't even say hi. She just motioned for me to come inside and led me straight to their home office. That's when I saw it. Matt's laptop open on the desk with a folder of photos pulled up. "Sit," Rachel said, pointing to the chair. I sat. My heart was pounding because I knew whatever this was, it wasn't going to be good. Rachel didn't waste any time. She clicked on one of the photos, and my stomach dropped. It was a picture of Emily. Not just any picture. This was from a family trip we'd all taken to Florida about 3 years ago. Emily was in a bikini, sitting by the pool, completely unaware that someone was taking her photo. My head started spinning. "What the hell is this?" I asked, my voice shaking. Rachel didn't answer. She just scrolled through the folder, and my worst fears were confirmed. There were dozens of photos. Emily at the beach. Emily at family barbecues. Emily walking the dog. Some of them were blurry, like they'd been taken from a distance without her knowing. And this wasn't just from one trip or one event. These pictures spanned years. I felt like I was going to throw up. Rachel finally spoke. "I found this on Matt's computer. I had a feeling something wasn't right, so I went through his stuff when he was in the shower." She shook her head, her voice cracking. I didn't want to believe it, but there it is. I was absolutely furious. I wanted to storm out of there, find Matt, and make him regret every single decision he'd ever made. But Rachel stopped me. "There's more," she said, and for a second, I thought my heart was going to stop. She opened another folder, and this one was even worse. There were screenshots of Emily's social media profiles, pictures she'd posted, comments she'd made, even some old photos from before we were married. There were notes, too, like little journal entries he'd written about her. Stuff like, "She looks so beautiful today. I wish I could tell her how I feel." It was beyond creepy. It was obsessive. And then Rachel said something that sent chills down my spine. "He's been doing this for years. Before you even married Emily." That's when it all clicked. The way Matt always seemed to hover around Emily at family gatherings. The way he'd volunteer to help us with random things like fixing stuff at our house or picking up groceries when we were busy. The way he'd always make these little comments about how lucky I was to have her. I'd always thought he was just being friendly, but now I realized he was crossing boundaries the entire time. I just hadn't seen it. Rachel was crying by this point, and I didn't know what to say. I wanted to comfort her, but I also wanted to scream. I asked her what she was going to do, and she just shook her head. "I don't know," she said, "but I can't stay married to him. Not after this." We agreed that she'd confront Matt the next day, and I told her to call me if she needed backup. When I got home, Emily was waiting for me, and I had to tell her everything. She was horrified, of course, but she also looked relieved in a way. Like finally, she had proof that this wasn't her fault, that she hadn't imagined any of it. We stayed up late that night, talking about what to do next and how to support Rachel through all of this. The next day, Rachel kicked Matt out of their house. She told him she wanted a divorce, and that she'd already contacted a lawyer. He didn't even try to deny it. He just packed a bag and left. But he didn't go quietly. He started sending her these long, rambling emails about how he'd made a mistake and how he couldn't live without her. Classic manipulator stuff. At one point, he even tried to blame me for turning Rachel against him, which was laughable considering, the literal mountain of evidence he left on his computer. Rachel didn't respond to any of it. Honestly, I think she was just done. Like, something inside her had snapped, and there was no going back. She told me she didn't even recognize him anymore, which was probably the hardest part, realizing the person she thought she knew never really existed. As for Emily, she was still dealing with the emotional fallout in her own way. She was angry, of course, but more than that, she was scared. I don't think I fully understood just how much this whole thing had shaken her until one night when we were lying in bed, and she said, "Do you think he's going to try to hurt me?" That question hit me like a ton of bricks. I'd been so focused on my own anger, on how betrayed I felt, that I hadn't really stopped to think about how vulnerable she must have felt. I mean, this wasn't just some random guy. This was someone who had been in our lives for years, someone we trusted, someone who had access to our home, our family, our lives. The idea that he could have escalated beyond creepy photos and obsessive messages. Yeah, it kept me up at night. So, we took precautions. We changed our locks, installed a security system, and even talked to the police about filing a restraining order. Unfortunately, the legal system is complicated. Because Matt hadn't made any explicit threats, and because the photos were taken in public or at family events, there wasn't much they could do beyond documenting everything. Still, having the police on record helped us feel a little safer. Rachel, meanwhile, was in full-on survival mode. She threw herself into the divorce process with a kind of laser focus I'd never seen before. She told me she was done crying over Matt, and that the only thing she cared about now was protecting her kids. Yeah, I haven't mentioned this yet, but Rachel has 2 young kids, and honestly, they're the ones I feel the worst for in all of this. They're too young to understand what's going on, but they definitely sense that something's wrong. Rachel told them that Daddy was staying somewhere else for a while, and for now, that seems to be enough. But I know the day will come when they're old enough to ask questions, and I honestly have no idea how she's going to explain any of this to them. As for Matt, I don't know exactly where he's staying now, and I don't really care. Rachel said he's been crashing with a friend, but she's made it clear he's not welcome back in the house. She's also started the process of splitting their assets, and she's fighting for full custody of the kids. I think Matt knows he's lost, but that hasn't stopped him from trying to stir up drama. He's still sending those pathetic emails, alternating between apologizing and lashing out, but Rachel's done a great job of ignoring him. She's stronger than I think even she realized. The rest of the family has been supportive for the most part. My parents were horrified when they found out what Matt had done, and they've been helping Rachel with the kids while she gets everything sorted. But there's definitely been some awkwardness. A few extended family members, like an aunt and a cousin, have tried to downplay the situation, saying things like, well, maybe he just had a moment of weakness, or it's not like he actually did anything. Let me tell you, hearing stuff like that has been infuriating. It's like, no, he didn't just make a mistake. He spent years obsessing over my wife, lying to his own family, and betraying everyone who trusted him. That's not a mistake. That's a pattern of behavior. But I've learned to just ignore those comments because, honestly, I don't have the energy to argue with people who don't get it. As for Emily and Rachel, their relationship is still solid, which is honestly a huge relief. I was worried this whole mess might drive a wedge between them, but if anything, it's brought them closer. Rachel has been really supportive of Emily, constantly reassuring her that none of this was her fault, and Emily has been doing the same for Rachel. They've been leaning on each other a lot, which makes me feel hopeful that eventually we'll all get through this.